Welcome back to the Best Anime Recap. Today, we will dive into a movie about a nameless man, awakening his power and becoming the ultimate Dark King. Please like the video and follow the channel to support us and receive notifications about the latest videos from the Best Anime Recap. In a mystical world where light and darkness are not just opposing extremes, but also parallel realms that coexist, each carrying its own destiny. The land of light, a radiant paradise protected by the holy maiden Iris, who possesses sacred power and immense compassion. She always stands ready to shield her people from all dangers. In stark contrast, the land of darkness is engulfed in deep gloom. Here we meet the protagonist, a nameless young man. Without identity or past, he lives among villagers in poverty, constantly facing hardship and lurking threats from ferocious monsters. One day, as a bad omen looms, they realize that today, the beasts will once again attack the village. With no other choice, they decide to fight, even if only to get a little meat for survival. The protagonist, with his kind heart, leads the village children to safety, hoping to protect them from the monster's claws. But fate is cruel. On the way, a giant centipede ferociously attacks. One by one, the children fall, perishing in despair. Only he survives, carrying the unbearable pain of loss. He couldn't save anyone. Returning to the village, a scene of devastation unfolds before his eyes. The entire village has been wiped out, one lone survivor amidst the ruins. A general named Kier happens to pass by. He finds the young man desperately digging graves for the fallen villagers. Despite his exhaustion and broken body, he continues digging with his bare hands, as if burying his own sorrow and helplessness deep in the cold earth. Moved by the sight, Kier hands him a piece of bread, giving him a little strength. Kier introduces himself and asks for his name, but the young man simply replies, "Call me whatever you like," for he had long been accustomed to having no name. A deep resentment rises within him. Why did the Dark King allow these beasts to run rampant, spreading destruction everywhere? Kier has no answer, only silently watching as he continues to dig. He digs, hoping to reach the light, even if it's just a fragile glimmer of hope. But then he realizes dreaming is useless, for once buried beneath the cold earth, all become dust, the same as everyone else. Suddenly, Kier throws him a sword, declaring he will teach him how to never end up in a grave again. He grips the sword, charging at Kier with all his might and resolve. But he is swiftly defeated. He growls that he doesn't need Kier's help. Kier only replies, "I want to see how determined you are. And if needed, I can take your life right here." In this ruthless world, the strong have power, and only the strong can face those who truly hold authority, like the Dark King. But know that I am not a king. I want to teach you something. Your existence is not for others to take as they please. Half-hearted resolve leads nowhere. If all you do is dig and wait for salvation from above, then when will I ever escape this dark swamp? To achieve my ideals, I must be willing to sacrifice my life for it. Those words awakened his lost mind, making the young man snap back. Gaining strength, he stood up again, charging into battle once more, this time with a powerful slash. He shattered the great sword of Kier, who then collapsed, revealing a shocking secret. He was the former Dark King, challenged and dethroned by the current ruler. Now, as old age and weakness approached, he entrusted the boy with the family's symbolic sword, placing his final hope in the young man. He wanted him to return to the castle, declare himself the Dark Prince, and seek volume. Who would take care of and mentor him? Kier believed this young man, though a resident of the Dark Kingdom, radiated the power of light, would be the one to change everything, correcting the mistakes he could not. Meanwhile, in the land of light, Queen Alice and her elite army fought off the invading dark forces. With overwhelming power, they achieved victory without suffering any casualties. When returning to the castle, Iris went to rest while her two trusted aides, Vios and Shima, two brothers with extraordinary strength, remained troubled by a difficult question. They believed that with the power of light, Iris would never be defeated by the Dark King. But to maintain the world's balance, both light and darkness were necessary. Was this why Iris hesitated? To eliminate the Dark King? Did she need him to preserve balance between two worlds? But the deeper truth was, Iris's power was gradually fading, and she feared the ever-growing strength of the Dark King. She did not know how much longer she could last. So she ordered intensified soldier training, preparing for even fiercer battles. In the future, regarding the protagonist, he arrived at Kier's residence and met Varys. At first, Varys suspected him of stealing the sword and killing Kier. But after hearing Kier's teachings and his claim of being Kier's descendant, and with Lute accepting him as its new master, that night, Seema met Alice to reminisce about the past and mentioned the previous queen. Suddenly, they received an urgent report. The enemy was massing from the west. Iris immediately summoned the mages and knights, quickly marching west to provide reinforcements. This time, the enemy was a giant monster, possessing intelligence as it could speak, mocking and provoking humans. It sneered at the mages, struggling to cast their spells, then charged at them, trampling over all the soldiers who tried shooting arrows at it. But to the beast, those arrows felt like mere ant stings, harmless and insignificant. Just then, Clan Chief Ellen appeared and halted the monster. The knights and mages, hearing of the Dark Army's presence, were forced to change course. However, Ellen was barely a match for this giant demon. It was like an invincible tank, both tough and powerful. Alice arrived just in time, witnessing the mages who had perished. Her heart overflowed with sorrow. She demanded the monster leave, or she would show no mercy. But it was unfazed. Instead, it challenged her to unleash all her power. At the same time, Vios led the elite knight squad and clashed with the dark soldiers. But unlike seasoned warriors, they were just miserable peasants, forced into this brutal war. With no will to fight, they quickly scattered like a broken beehive. Suddenly, one by one, they were consumed by the evil darkness, manipulating their minds, turning them into soulless puppets, losing all reason, madly attacking each other. Meanwhile, Iris with all her strength, launched fierce attacks at the giant demon, but to it, those attacks were nothing more than mosquito bites on steel, causing no harm at all. It even found them amusing, mocking the feeble strength of Queen Alice. In a life-or-death moment, when she witnessed two innocent people being cruelly slaughtered by the demon, she decided to pour all her power into a final strike. But then, a thought flashed through her mind. She feared that the light stone, her sacred source of power, would not be able to withstand it and shatter, so she had to suppress her power. Holding back in helplessness and despair, the demon, seeing that Alice did not dare to go all out, grew bored, scornful, and walked away, leaving behind a scene of devastation and ruin. At the same time, Virus had arrived to meet the Dark King. Another minister, worried about the heavy losses, spoke out in protest, hoping to put an end to these meaningless wars. But the Dark King, with his ruthless ambition for domination, mercilessly punished him, eliminating anyone who dared to oppose him. He longed to drown the world in eternal darkness, and to achieve that goal, he planned to destroy Alice's floating city, the last symbol of light. However, even the Dark King was struggling to deal with that demon, as it was the most powerful entity in the world, the embodiment of humanity's selfishness, greed, and cruelty. But the time was approaching when its existence would no longer matter. The Dark King placed his faith in the protagonist, hoping he would be a worthy successor to continue his path of ruling the dark world. Values later returned, and the protagonist, driven by his desire to become king, asked him to teach him swordsmanship, believing that if he couldn't defeat Venus, how could he be worthy of the noble throne? At first, Venus wanted him to learn knowledge first, for he believed that a king without knowledge was like a hollow grain of rice, incapable of cultivation, and the people would suffer in poverty and hardship. He also motivated him with a promise that they would start sword training the next day. As a military trainer, Venus had encountered many potential successors and saw a special quality in him. In the days that followed, Values devoted himself to teaching him not only profound knowledge and masterful swordsmanship, but also manual labor, working like a true farmer. Though he managed to knock Valuus's sword away, he humbly considered it mere luck. Showing no arrogance or pride, after some time, Values saw his remarkable progress. He had become much stronger, yet he remained humble, believing he was still no match for his mentor. Values then took out the outfit that Kier once wore, giving it to him as a sign of recognition and trust. Later, they met Yoga, a girl whose name matched that of a firearm. But she was a brilliant commander. In the Dark King's army, she encountered several demonic beasts, displaying a few masterful martial moves, but was careless, almost getting ambushed from behind by one of them. If the protagonist hadn't stepped in just in time, upon hearing that he was also a candidate, she took him along, revealing an upcoming competition among the candidates to find the one strong enough to inherit the Dark King's great sword and be recognized as his successor. Back to Alice. Since that horrifying night, she could not shake off the haunting memories about his own helplessness when he couldn't save the innocent people. Chima, her close friend, came to see her, announcing that he would be going to the battlefield that night to rebuild everything. Alice reminisced about the past, when both she and Chima were considered qualified to inherit the Queen's throne. and both of them promised each other that whoever ascended the throne would never be envious or jealous. They both had different perspectives on the life of a queen. One believed it was a blissful heavenly existence, while the other thought it was a confined life, trapped in a lavish palace. Before leaving, Seema invited Alice to dinner that night, and she decided to pick some wild vegetables to contribute to the meal. Following her, Kier's youngest brother mocked Alice with sarcastic remarks, but she remained cheerful and graciously enjoyed the meal before taking her leave. Fias, while escorting Alice home, complained about his younger brother becoming bothersome whenever there were guests. But Alice gently said, the boy simply wanted to liven up the dinner atmosphere and make it more exciting. Vios also thanked her for the wild vegetables she brought, saying that anything hand-picked by Alice would always taste better. After seeing her home, Fias promised to visit again. But Alice asked him what qualities were needed to become a queen. Fias, despite wanting to, could not provide a satisfying answer. He only knew that he vowed to be a sharp sword, protecting the queen with his life. Iris had not yet found her own answer, but she believed it would come once she officially ascended the throne. And then, on a fateful day, she was suddenly attacked by an evil darkness, but the sacred light protected her, helping her purify the darkness completely, and thus she became the successor queen. Knowing it was destiny, she vowed to stand strong and continue her noble mission. Meanwhile, the protagonist was ready to set out to participate in the competition. Yoga would be the referee and announce the rules. The contestants had to fight each other, and the last two remaining would face off. In a decisive duel, the winner would claim the prestigious blade. Kier initiated the challenge. They had to confront fierce monsters. Each was strong enough to handle one on their own. But the mage girl appeared weak, forcing the protagonist to intervene. She thought he pitied her, and others also expressed their discontent. Suddenly, a gigantic monster was unleashed, rampaging and attacking all contestants, except the protagonist and a mysterious red-haired young man. The mage tried to exploit the chaos to gain an advantage, but was stopped by the protagonist, as only he was strong enough to defeat the monster. With a single decisive slash, he finished off the ferocious monster, leaving everyone in awe. The medical team quickly rushed in. Meanwhile, an assassin who had been hiding attempted to ambush the protagonist, but was stabbed in the leg by the red-haired young man, as a warning to both. Then they officially entered the inner chamber to face each other directly while resting in the waiting room. The red-haired young man reprimanded the protagonist for saving others, saying that a king does not need to rescue the weak. But the protagonist, with his noble ideals, wanted to become a king to save everyone, regardless of strength or status. And then the most anticipated moment arrived. Both stepped into the life and death battle, where their opposing ideals would clash fiercely. But after just a few elegant sword moves, the protagonist showcased his superiority, completely dominating, leaving his opponent overwhelmed, even though he had given it his all. Still unable to resist, the sword had slipped from his hands at some point. The protagonist, with his kindness, wanted him to surrender, but his indomitable will did not allow him to give up. He staggered to his feet, trying to pick up his sword again, but once again, the protagonist's cold blade was pressed against his throat. forcing him to bitterly accept defeat. The protagonist officially claimed the sacred sword, a proof of his noble status as the Prince of Darkness. With an open heart, he took the initiative to befriend his former opponent, and despite his defeat, the other still held his head high, introducing himself as Adu. They happened to meet Venus, their respected teacher, and he was not too surprised by the result. He brought an urgent order from the king, stating that he and Adu must set out for the Kingdom of Light to negotiate. Carrying an important letter, the protagonist's heart surged with excitement, eager to set foot in that legendary land, to meet the King of Light and learn from him, to understand what qualities and virtues a king should possess. He and Adu boarded a special ship, powered by mystical magic and the strength of tireless men, heading towards the radiant city of Iris. Gyoga, with a worried expression, warned them to be cautious, for even as envoys, tensions still existed between the two nations, conflicts that were difficult to erase. The protagonist, with his innocent heart, only thought this would be a simple letter delivery trip. But Adu, with his vast experience, believed that if the negotiations failed, then, as envoys, they would be the first to suffer the consequences. Adu, with his sharp mind, came up with a bold idea for the protagonist to disguise himself as his guard, so that, if anything went wrong, the protagonist might be pardoned, preserving his position as prince. And so they finally arrived. With his adventurous spirit, Adu wanted to liven up the atmosphere. He and the protagonist strode boldly into the city, only to be immediately stopped by Fios, the valiant general. Adu firmly declared their reason for being there: to deliver a negotiation letter. But Fios, with skeptical eyes, was not easily convinced by the Dark Kingdom's people. However, Adu also affirmed that he did not want war to break out, for anyone who disobeyed the cruel Dark King would be mercilessly eliminated. Under his rule, no one could defy him, and their lives were constantly hanging by a thread, ready to be taken at any moment, depending solely on his ever-changing whims. Fios, with a cold expression, believed it was an internal matter of the Dark Kingdom. But the truth was, any sign of defiance would be met with immediate, ruthless purging. After a tense discussion, the two finally reached a mutual understanding, with an honorable promise, a commitment that Fios would not regret this agreement. And thanks to that, they were allowed to pass. Fios then returned to report to Alice, before officially leading the two young men to an audience. On the way, the protagonist couldn't help but be overwhelmed by the prosperity and grandeur of the City of Light, a society he had always dreamed of. However, they continuously endured scrutinizing gazes and whispers calling them demons, making them feel uncomfortable and out of place. Finally, they were led into the magnificent grand hall. Fios went ahead to report to Alice, and when she stepped out, radiating dazzling beauty, everyone held their breath. All eyes were drawn to her luminous, mysterious gaze. The protagonist was mesmerized, frozen in place for 5 seconds, until Adu subtly nudged him, snapping him out of it, prompting him to bow respectfully. Alice, after reading the letter, realizing that the relationship between the two worlds had become too distant, making reconciliation nearly impossible. But Adu, with his skillful diplomacy, believed that for now they needed to unite, forming a common front to fight against the ferocious demon, the embodiment of destruction. Alice knew that if the demon was eliminated, The Dark King, with his ambitions, would surely turn his blade against her. But both of them believed that this would only be true if the current Dark King remained in power, because they revealed a shocking secret. The Dark King intended to abdicate in the near future, passing the throne to the next generation. And this next generation was the protagonist, who greatly desired to establish peaceful relations with her. Both eagerly awaited Alice's response, and she promised to make a decision another day, after careful consideration. After that, Yoga was forced to return to the palace due to an urgent summons from Virus. She knew that the one who truly wanted to meet her was the Dark King, and she had already steeled herself for the impending confrontation. That afternoon, the two young men were led by Fios to the guest room, but he did not forget to remind them that they were still envoys of an enemy nation and should be cautious in their every action. Curious about what Iris was like, Fios, with a mischievous look in his eyes, suggested that he was merely flattering her to coax the queen into accepting their pact. That night, he and Adnan discussed and debated. Ardo believed that everyone here was narrow-minded, and that Alice was merely exploiting the situation, agreeing to the pact for her own personal gain. The protagonist, with a kind heart, did not want to believe that, as not everyone was as evil and deceitful as Adele thought. The next morning, Yuri's summoned both of them back to the main hall to give them an answer. The protagonist asked, as the heir to the throne, how the people under the Dark King's rule felt about the demon's presence. With sincerity, he replied that it would bring death and sorrow, but if they could destroy it, they could save countless innocent lives. Hearing this, the kind-hearted Iris decided to help them fight the ferocious demon. Chima, having just returned from a reconstruction mission, heard that the protagonist sought peace talks, and that Iris had decided to descend into the Dark Kingdom to assist in battle. The two young men at this moment were held hostage as a precaution against the Dark King's schemes. After interacting with them, Vios realized that the two were not truly evil, but still needed to be observed and monitored further. Meanwhile, Iris had set foot in the Dark Kingdom, but the demon, an unstoppable force, had already reached the Dark King's castle. Lut and his elite army had prepared everything to confront it. With courage, he charged forward, leading a pack of ferocious beasts. But the demon, with just a casual wave of its hand, instantly wiped out the entire pack, leaving not a single trace behind. Yoga ordered the soldiers to fire arrows and hurl stones at its wings, but its massive body, as hard as steel, effortlessly deflected everything. She launched magical attacks, but they had no effect at all. The demon stormed through the fortress like a hurricane, destroying everything in its path, forcing Fallet to unleash more monsters to stall it. Now the monsters had formed a massive magic formation, trying to restrain the demon, but it, with its unmatched power, annihilated them one by one, only to be ensnared again by the final desperate efforts of the sorcerers. Yoga and Valet gave their all, launching their most powerful attacks together. But all their efforts were as useless as salt in the sea, for the dragon was simply too strong, utterly invincible. Even when facing danger, he showed no fear. He kept charging forward, battling the ferocious monster, but with just one earth-shaking roar. It completely paralyzed Volume, rendering him motionless. It opened its enormous mouth, preparing to unleash a destructive energy blast, engulfing both Volume and Ryoga in flames. At the most critical moment, the Dark King had to step in personally. He rescued his subordinate from the jaws of death. He activated a forbidden dark magic to expand his domain, trapping the demon in an infinite space where only darkness reigned. He continuously unleashed a series of dark spells, his most powerful attacks. But to the demon, they were nothing more than an itch, meaningless and insignificant, just when the situation seemed hopeless. Like a savior, someone appeared to assist with a spell. They conjured chains of light, binding the ferocious demon. For the first time in history, the two kings of two worlds, light and darkness, together they united, dragging the demon into the mouth of an erupting volcano. Spewing lava furiously, helplessly pulled down, the demon roared, cursing the two kings, calling them cowardly, despicable for collaborating with an eternal enemy, just to capture it. It challenged them if they had the guts. Why not try to kill it? But to them, sealing it beneath the eternal volcano was more than enough. After the pact was fulfilled, Iris turned and left with little hesitation. The protagonist and Adele finally met Shima. They told her about their reason for coming, as well as the chaotic, dangerous state of the Dark Kingdom. Suddenly, the protagonist noticed Alice had returned. He rushed over to support her. She seemed exhausted from the intense battle. She gently told him that the pact was completed. Fios and her sister Seema also arrived, helping Eris back to the palace while Alice was being treated. Shima noticed the dark energy from the ancient stone. It was slowly draining Alice's life force, making her weaker. Worried, she asked her brother Fios to tell the protagonist about the battle's outcome. Curious, Aiden searched for the protagonist. He assumed the protagonist must be worried about Alice because he had begun to sense the protagonist's special feelings for Queen Fios. Later, he informed them that the demon had been defeated, meaning that their mission here was also complete. At that moment, Ryoga met Falut, and he realized sealing the vicious demon was a great victory, a crucial strategic advantage for the Dark faction. He asked Ji to deliver a letter to the City of Light. She couldn't hide her joy, because she would soon see the protagonist again. The busy days, full of tension, seemed to fade away, replaced by a sense of relief, serenity, as she thought of him. That morning, the two young men prepared to leave. Adoa, with his courageous heart, decided to persuade the Dark King to end the war, because he realized that peace, no matter how fragile, was still the best thing, even knowing that it could lead to death. Adoa still believed that with sincerity, the Dark King would understand. At that moment, Yogi appeared carrying another letter. After presenting the letter to Iris, she revealed that the Dark King wanted to extend the ceasefire until the heavy damages from the battle could be repaired. Vios felt relieved for Adoa, because he wouldn't have to die too soon. Iris accepted the proposal and decided to invite the protagonist's group to stay and explore the Kingdom of Light. She personally led them. The group goes on a tour, and their first destination is meeting Theo, the little boy. At first, he was a bit scared when he saw the people from the Dark faction appear, but he quickly recognized the protagonist and Adnan, his newly met friends. The boy revealed that he was trying to heal two flying raccoons by transferring energy from the sacred tree into their bodies. Fios was surprised to see his younger brother able to do something so miraculous, but the boy explained that he had been carefully taught by Shima and that in the future he might even surpass Fios. Looking at these adorable little creatures, the protagonist's group felt they were far different from the troublesome flying raccoons, who always caused trouble and stole from the Dark Kingdom. Yoga couldn't hide his jealousy inside. Seeing the protagonist always close to Alice, they later also noticed the stark difference in fashion between the two worlds. One side was dark with all black outfits, while the other was vibrant, pure with dazzling white clothing, which made Yoga come up with a bold idea. Both sides would swap outfits to experience the difference. The first pair to try were Adnan and Fios, creating quite a hilarious scene. Amusingly, the girls found it interesting and eagerly joined in. Yoga, being daring, was the first to try on Alice's outfit, while Alice put on a loose and oversized outfit, looking a bit messy. She then tried on Shima's outfit as well, and when she stepped out, only Alice looked a little awkward. In the ill-fitting outfit, they turned to ask the protagonist who he liked best, but he was confused, unable to choose because in his eyes, everyone was beautiful in their own way. The whole day, they played board games together, and though Fios tried his best, he kept losing and was determined to reclaim his honor. But the two girls thought it was best to let the protagonist's group leave. However, Aiden generously offered to stay another night as compensation for Fios to win at least once. Shima, being responsible, went to the kitchen to cook, and she made a simple yet warm dish: a hot pot of soup. When tasted, the light faction found it just right, but the dark faction found it bland. Yoga, quick-witted, took out a special spice from the Dark Kingdom. This seasoning was rich and flavorful, but when the light faction tried it, they found it too salty, impossible to eat. However, when the mild soup was combined with the strong spice, the dark faction found it incredibly delicious. The blended flavors excited the light faction's taste buds. Curious, they also decided to taste it, and to their surprise, they also found the flavor amazing. It was no longer too salty. Before they knew it, the entire pot of soup was gone. Not a single drop was left. Adnan felt a bit regretful, because in the future, there might be fewer chances to taste such a special dish again. Hearing that, Fios introduced them to a rustic dish that Alice often picked: wild vegetables, which everyone was excited to try. So that night, they quickly went to sleep, to wake up early and explore the mysterious forest. But the protagonist tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Yoga took the chance to approach him, trying to win his favor, hoping to spark some special feelings from his heart. But all she received in return was cold indifference, making her feel hurt, sad, while Iris felt overwhelming joy inside, excitedly looking forward to the next morning. The next day, the whole group cheerfully headed into the forest to pick wild vegetables. They set up a fun little competition, pairing up with each other, and the team that collects more vegetables will win. Vios and Yoga, secretly hoping to be paired with the one they secretly admire. Everyone agreed, but with one condition: two people from two different worlds must be paired together. However, Iris carefully reminded them to be well prepared, because some wild vegetables in the forest are very toxic. Not to mention, they must be picked correctly. Otherwise, they won't be edible. For example, the Kier thorn plant. The fruit must be picked from the top, and only those of moderate size should be chosen, meeting the standard to avoid bitterness. Alice started listing a long and detailed explanation of vegetables, making everyone dizzy and overwhelmed, fearing that with her vast knowledge, Iris would dominate the competition. They unanimously banned her from participating, because now she was like a living encyclopedia on the herbs of this place. So they divided into 3 pairs and started the race. Seema and Adele were the first pair, carefully picking low-growing plants. According to Alice, these plants were completely edible, although a bit hard to find. The protagonist and Yoga's second pair also harvested a significant amount of vegetables. With a spirit of learning, he asked Iris for guidance on some wild vegetables. The close interaction between the two unintentionally made Fios, who secretly admired Iris, feel a surge of jealousy and discomfort. After summarizing the results, the protagonist's team, with Iris's significant help, achieved a crushing victory, harvesting the most wild vegetables. But no matter how outstanding they were, they could never surpass Iris, the true queen of wild vegetables. The group then gathered all the vegetables to wash. Adele's team was assigned to gather firewood, while the boys were busy collecting wood. Deep in the forest, the 3 girls carefully washed each leaf by the riverbank, removing the bitter taste. Erit kindly told Yoga and Shima to go ahead and let her handle the rest. Meanwhile, the boys suddenly realized that Theo, the mischievous boy, had gone missing. Panicked, they split up to search for him. The protagonist ran anxiously to the lake, where Alice was washing vegetables, accidentally tripping. In a moment of panic, he accidentally pushed her into the cool water. In that romantic scene, he stammered about Theo's disappearance. Iris calmly responded that Theo had already returned with Yoga and Shima earlier. Still, she appreciated his concern and worry for Theo. The two then decided to sit and dry their clothes by the scenic lake. Meanwhile, Adele and Fios finally arrived, finding Theo sitting obediently, sighing in relief. It turned out he had gotten slightly lost, but remembered Fios's instructions, carefully retracing his steps, and luckily found his way back. The protagonist and Iris, after their clothes had dried, returned to reunite with everyone. Iris, with her warm heart, decided to personally cook a meal for the whole group, a delicious feast made from the freshly picked wild vegetables. After a while of cooking and preparing, the dishes were served, though they were just wild vegetables. But under Iris's skillful hands, they looked incredibly appealing and appetizing, since on the ground it was rare to find such fresh and vibrant greens as these. The protagonist found the meal exceptionally tasty and satisfying. Yoga couldn't hide her jealousy, but when the protagonist gently fed her, she couldn't help but be enchanted by the amazing flavors. Feeling that something was missing a bit of salt, Shima quickly took out some to season the food. And now the meal became perfectly rich and flavorful. Everyone hoped that in the future, the two kingdoms could sign a trade pact and develop together. But under the current circumstances, that is impossible. Iris only wished that this peaceful and joyful moment could last forever. Early the next morning, a mysterious ship arrived at the port, and a messenger quietly handed Adnan a secret letter. He then went to call the protagonist, informing him of a summons. They had to depart immediately. Both of them quickly reunited with Fios, who, with some regret, returned the sword to them. They also set off to say their goodbyes. Alice wished to bid farewell before leaving. Meanwhile, Yoga had already packed and was ready to board. A feeling of loneliness arose within her, emptiness at the thought of the days ahead. But at least she would no longer have to witness her prince by Alice's side, the woman she could never compare to. The two young men were led by Phios to meet Iris, who, with determined eyes, handed them a trade agreement, with the hope that both sides could maintain this fragile peace and prosper together. Idle, once a calm and ordinary person, within mere moments transformed into someone completely different, a terrifying, hate-filled figure. With a voice full of resentment, he declared that the people of the kingdom of light lived in abundance, happiness, while those in the kingdom of darkness suffered in poverty, enduring hardship. Just so Iris, with her noble appearance, could justify it all by claiming to maintain balance for the world, that there must always be darkness to counter the light. Adele, in his fury, turned into a demon and charged at Alice, forcing the protagonist to do the only thing left: draw his ancestral greatsword, ready to punish the traitor. Witnessing this horrifying scene, everyone believed that this was the true nature, the brutal essence of those from the darkness. Phios, enraged, restrained the protagonist, believing he was a savage, unworthy of forgiveness, and ordered him to be tied up. Yoga's ship was also forced to leave, as soldiers, hearing of the two's capture, feared an impending crisis. That night, Phios, consumed by anger, could not calm down, thinking he had been deceived by a false guise of diplomacy. He believed that war was now inevitable, as long as this so-called balance that Iris always spoke of existed. The two worlds would never cease their conflict, hatred. But Theo, with his superior intellect, believed nothing was eternal. And if people were wise enough to control themselves, to restrain their greed and selfishness, perhaps some of the pain and suffering could be lessened. Phios realized that if the war truly ended, then young Theo, with his talent and intelligence, might create an entirely new era, brilliant and glorious. But sadly, he was not the one who could bring it about. Kai Ma gently remarked that everyone has their own mission, and the important thing is to focus on fulfilling that mission instead of chasing empty dreams. Meanwhile, Alice sought the ancient texts in search of guidance for her upcoming decisions. She was anxious and worried, because the harder she tried to maintain balance, the more the conflict between the two worlds intensified. And as their leader, she was at the center of this eternal hatred. With a deep and solemn voice, only advised her to be brave in choosing what she truly wanted to protect. With both her heart and mind, we return to the protagonist at this moment, who awoke in a cold, dark prison. He could not understand why, at that moment, he had chosen to protect Alice, even though he realized that Adu was carrying out a mission to assassinate her. He wasn't sure whether, if Adnan had succeeded at that moment, the Dark Kingdom would have become a better place or not. Lost in a whirlwind of thoughts, he couldn't understand what he had been trying to say at that moment. This is the way of life for the people of darkness, that they cannot go against the king's will. Please do not think ill of them, but those words, from the depths of his heart, were not what he truly wanted to say. Suddenly, a white cat, with piercing eyes, appeared before the prison bars, and through some miraculous means, unlocked the gate, leading him to follow. Curious, he followed the cat, and noticed that the heavily guarded prison was now completely deserted. For a moment, he thought, perhaps they had deliberately let him escape. The protagonist followed the cat's lead to the rooftop, then to a precarious cliff, where his two swords were planted, as if waiting for their master. And then the mysterious cat, in a dazzling light, transformed into an ancient stone, with Alice manifesting within it. In that moment of reunion, they opened their hearts to each other. The protagonist confessed that he too wished to bring happiness to his people, just as Iris had done for her city. That brilliant light, he bravely revealed his identity as a prince. And Iris, with her perceptive heart, had somewhat sensed it before. He swore, with all his honor and determination, to fight for the throne, and then, together with her, build everlasting peace for both worlds. Alice, with her kind heart, promised to support him with all her might. He was deeply grateful for her kindness. He only asked her to be patient, to wait for the day he fulfilled his ambitions. The protagonist, for a long time, had always been a mystery to Alice. He was somewhat hesitant, indecisive, but deep inside sincere, and uniquely calm. The fact that he was the heir was something she had somewhat guessed, but his outward demeanor was completely opposite to that noble identity. She had once worried about it, about how someone so indecisive like him could be the one to inherit the throne. But through their heartfelt conversation, she was somewhat reassured, believing that he was a man of his word, someone who could be trusted. The next day, Iris had to once again fight fiercely against ferocious demons sent by the dark faction. Her strength, after continuous battles, was steadily depleting, declining significantly. Moreover, upon receiving reports from her subordinates, she became even more worried. Beyond those demons, the Night Order and many mages were also struggling to fend off additional waves of enemy attacks. They knew that this war would continue, dragging on and becoming even more brutal. But with Iris's current state of strength, holding out for long would be extremely difficult, almost impossible. Fios, worried about Iris, requested to be absent for a while to embark on a journey in search of a remedy that could fully restore her. But if he left, the Night Order would be like a snake without a head, without a leader to command. Iris, with her strong sense of responsibility, believed that she would recover soon. So she advised Fios to stay and train everyone, to be fully prepared for the upcoming fierce battle. Before leaving, Fios still carried a lingering worry, hoping that Shima, his younger sister, could temporarily take over the leadership of the Night Order, because he found a clue about something that could help Alice regain her power. Chima, though worried, still hoped that her brother wouldn't do anything. Reckless and quietly went back inside, carrying an unease in her heart. Vios then went to meet Alan. Alice had grown significantly weaker since the life and death battle with the giant demon. Physically, she had fully recovered, but her spiritual power, the energy within her, had yet to be restored. He knew of a place where a special power could be found, something that could help Alice regain her strength. But until now, no one had ever set foot in that place, let alone returned from it. Vios was determined to go there with Alan. He even lied, claiming he had Alice's permission to leave the army for a while. Hearing that, Alan finally agreed to take the risk and set out with him. The next morning, Chima and other sorcerers were performing a highly complex magical ritual. It required absolute synchronization among the members to be successfully cast. Therefore, they had to practice repeatedly without rest. Suddenly, soldiers rushed in, reporting that Vios had vanished without a trace. Chima panicked and ran to find Iris. And Alice also heard the bad news. Chima was so afraid that she wanted to take the blame for her brother. However, with her kind heart, Alice did not intend to punish her. Instead, she advised her to return and continue her unfinished work. Meanwhile, Vios and Alan had arrived at the entrance of the mysterious cave. Alan once again warned him that no one had ever entered and made it back out, but with unwavering determination. Vios was ready to face all dangers. Back to the main protagonist. That night, he was picked up by Yoga's airship and returned to the Dark Kingdom. However, upon his return, he found the scenery desolate and empty. There were even fewer people than before, which made him feel sorrowful. He also believed that Iris, as the leader, had to bear too many burdens. Not only the lives of the people, but also the suffering and loss of this entire world. He vowed to himself to work even harder to stand beside Alice, sharing some of her burdens. The next day, he continued his sword training with Valut. With his keen perception, Valut noticed his resolve had changed, stronger and more determined. He wondered if the path they were taking was the right one. Suddenly, Valut, in a serious tone, ordered him to no longer get involved with the Kingdom of Light. Then he began lecturing, saying that when the protagonist took the throne, as long as he gave the order, Valut would devote himself to helping him rule the world. Just as they were about to continue training, Yoga rushed in, bringing urgent news. She and the protagonist had been assigned an emergency mission to eliminate the demonic beasts rampaging at the front lines. They needed to depart immediately. Without any delay, Valut, with his vast experience, understood the dark intentions behind this order. As soon as the two left, he immediately returned to report to the Dark King, informing him that the troops had been fully assembled, ready for battle. The Dark King hesitated for a moment, but then swiftly gave the order to mobilize the army and start the war. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Yoga had arrived at the front lines, beginning their hunt for the demonic beasts. The terrain of this place was complex, resembling a vast labyrinth, filled with countless dangers. The two soon encountered the first demonic beasts, but they were merely weak, insignificant creatures. It couldn't possibly be the reason both were summoned here. They continued to advance deeper inside. Be cautious. Eliminate all the monsters in their path. Suddenly, a swarm of spectral beasts, insect-like creatures with terrifying speed, launched an attack, causing Yoga. In the chaos, she was flung off the southern cliff. 1 second of hesitation, the protagonist jumped after her, shielding her from a fatal fall. As both landed safely, they discovered nearby a group of spectral beasts being fiercely attacked by some mysterious creature, and the one attacking them was none other than a colossal bull-headed monster, a ferocious beast imprisoned in these deep underground caverns. Meanwhile, Iris, with her leadership skills, had stationed her troops at the island's perimeter, ready for battle, for the enemy was closing in on the gates. Chima, carrying a heavy responsibility, had to rush back and forth, struggling to command the soldiers in defense, awaiting the return of Fios, the one holding their hope. At that moment, Fios, along with Ale, ventured deeper into the mysterious cave, but all they saw ahead was a dead end. With his experience, Aelin pulled out a grappling hook, helping both of them climb higher to continue their arduous journey. Fios nearly fell into the bottomless abyss, But Aelin, quick as lightning, caught hold of him just in time, saving him from certain death. The soldiers and mages on the city walls were facing immense difficulty, fiercely fighting back, forcing Shima to personally enter the battle. Holding the strategic position in their stead, Phias and Aelin, after searching for a while, still found nothing of value. With sharp intuition, Aelin tried changing his perspective and discovered a hidden passage concealed behind the cave's complex structure. Thanks to this, they could venture deeper, getting closer to their objective in the city. At that moment, the enemy had also secretly infiltrated, making the already weak defenses even more fragile than ever. Meanwhile, after going deeper inside, Phias and Aelin used bombs to break the obstructing rocks, opening a new path leading to a special area filled with shimmering crystals. They tried slashing them with their swords, but to no avail. The crystals remained unscathed. With profound knowledge, Aelin attempted using elemental magic and unexpectedly succeeded in opening a mysterious portal, leading to another space without hesitation. They stepped inside and finally found something that could help Alice. The very thing they had been searching for, but as Phias reached out to take the precious artifact, Aelin, with wary eyes, stopped him. He knew it wouldn't be that easy, for that immense, terrifying energy would destroy anything that came close, crushing everything, even the hardest rock. Aelin, worried, sought a safer solution. But Phias, burning with urgency, refused to wait any longer. Deciding to risk it all, he boldly advanced toward the energy source. His body gradually evaporated under the immense power, yet he did not falter. In his mind, at that moment, was only the image of the city struggling to hold on, his sister, Shima, barely holding out, and most importantly, Alice, the woman he vowed to protect with his life. Muttering to himself in reassurance at last, Phias finally reached the miraculous power. And like magic, it fell into his hands on its own, glowing brilliantly, a success beyond expectations, not wasting a single second. They immediately returned, bringing with them the hope of victory. Meanwhile, Iris and Shima, along with the skilled mages, had to unleash an ultimate spell, creating a massive barrier, enveloping and protecting the entire city. As Phias returned, he realized the enormous barrier, glowing with brilliance. He knew for certain Alice had poured all her strength into casting it. The more he thought about it, the more urgent it felt. He had to quickly bring the elixir back for Iris. There was no time to delay any further. Back to the protagonist. At that moment, he and Yoga were facing the Minotaur. The ferocious Yoga, with the magic gun in her hand, she fired a powerful shot. But to the monster, it was nothing more than a mosquito bite, completely ineffective. She intended to fire a stronger shot, a more destructive one, but the protagonist suddenly charged forward, bravely confronting the beast head-on. The monster, with its extraordinary strength, raised its massive blade, blocking the protagonist's attack, and flung him aside. But he didn't give up and came back to fight again. And this time with Yoga's support, they managed to successfully defeat the fierce monster, bringing victory to both after a fierce battle. Both returned to the camp, and Yoga, with her caring heart, personally cooked and prepared food for the protagonist. She wanted him to regain his strength, to recover. and become a wise king as soon as possible. But the protagonist was overwhelmed with vague thoughts, recalling Valet's words about the darkness's true nature, and questioning himself. Did he truly wish to become part of that dark world or not? Yoga, with sincere emotions, believed that he was destined to bear the kingdom's fate, and she vowed to always support him with all her heart, because he was the one she admired and loved the most. But after a moment, through his distant gaze, she realized that in his heart there was already Iris, the girl she could never compare to. Sadness, disappointment mixed with jealousy rose within her. Yoga burst into tears and ran away, deciding to step back and silently watch over him, supporting him on the path he had chosen. At this moment, Fias had also brought the elixir back for Alice. After Shima infused its mystical power into Alice's body, she felt better. Her vitality gradually recovered. The two siblings sighed in relief and returned home to rest. Fias also received an urgent message from the knights. Shima informed that the barrier could no longer be maintained, so they had to prepare carefully for the worst possible scenario before the barrier collapsed. The next morning, the night forces were fully prepared. After a night's rest, Alice awoke full of energy. She prayed in the ancient tongue, wishing to see the protagonist once more, to fight by his side, to overcome challenges together. She met Fias again and felt emotional. The two of them, before the moment of life and death, exchanged sincere words of encouragement and comfort, mostly about how the gods would always protect and watch over the righteous, not letting anyone suffer harm, and other words of encouragement to lift their spirits. In the end, they saw each other as family, as precious loved ones, who must be protected at all costs. That day, the protagonist went to meet the people, and everyone hoped the Dark King would win, bringing them a better life. Some wished for lower taxes to ease the burden of heavy levies. The children, in their innocence, hoped for Iris's island to disappear so their mother's laundry would dry faster. But the protagonist, faced with such wishes and hopes, didn't know how to respond. His heart conflicted and troubled. After that, the soldiers came to take him away to prepare for the upcoming battle. Meanwhile, Theo, Fios's younger brother, was carefully packing up, preparing for the worst-case scenario. In case the battle spiraled out of control, he would have to flee to the shore, finding a safe place. But how long could he endure? You're not sure either. Theo also wished for his two siblings, if the situation turned dire, to quickly retreat and preserve their lives. But Fias, with an optimistic spirit, only saw it as a simple reminder. They firmly believed that as long as Alice remained, they would never face defeat. Light would triumph over darkness. The protective barrier was then lowered. And now the battle had officially begun. More brutal and fierce than ever before, the war raged intensely from the skies to the ground. The knights and mages, with courageous spirits, had to split up to defend. If just one side collapsed, everything would crumble into dust. Alice, bearing the responsibility of a leader, had to face the Dark King head-on, the eternal enemy of the Kingdom of Light. With his dark power, he trapped her in a pitch-black space and continuously unleashed fierce monsters, attacking her relentlessly. Both sides gradually fell into disadvantage. Overwhelmed by enemies on the ground, the soldiers struggled to hold their ground. In the skies, though many were shot down, the enemies swarmed like a broken hive, increasing in number. More ferocious, they invaded the city, forcing the remaining soldiers to stand and protect, shielding the innocent citizens. Some, unfortunately, were corrupted into darkness, forcing their comrades with heavy hearts to eliminate them and prevent further catastrophe. Sima once again had to return to the city to assist the people, protecting them from the enemy's claws. With all her strength, she conjured another barrier, encasing the city, forming a temporary shield. Meanwhile, Phaios encountered Valet, a brilliant general of the dark forces, driven back to the city gates. He, upholding the honor of a knight, challenged Phaios to a duel, a battle between two valiant warriors. King Iris and the Dark King wasted no time. Not wanting delays, they unleashed their powers against each other. A fight to the death. Sima's barrier had also reached its limit, shattering into pieces, exposing the city's vulnerability. Like a flood, darkness spread, corrupting the soldiers within, turning them into mindless puppets, servants of the dark forces. Sima tried to cleanse them, but all efforts were futile. Like salt in the ocean, in desperation, she pleaded for power from the ancient runes, hoping for a miracle to happen. The two knights were still giving their all, fighting with unwavering determination. But Valet, with his extensive battle experience, still held the upper hand. He believed the reason for Phaios' defeat was that they had lived too long in comfort and peace, leading to weakness, cowardice, and the fact that Phaios placed trust and his own life in the hands of others. It was nothing more than a foolish act, a reckless mistake. Phaios, though bitter and enraged, could do nothing, helplessly defending against the relentless strikes of values. Alice tried to charge at the Dark King, but with his overwhelming power, he continuously fired. And in a moment of distraction, she was struck, plummeting straight from the sky. Like a fallen angel, Sima continued to plead for power from the ancient runes. But the only answer was a terrifying silence. A single glimmer of hope left her in complete despair. Yet, with unwavering determination, Sima rose again to challenge fate. Refusing to surrender, Alice, moved by Sima's courage, decided to join her and the mages, using a special ability, a forbidden spell, hoping to turn the tide of battle, to shift the situation. But just as they were casting the spell, the magic circle was suddenly interrupted midway, vanished mysteriously, making Iris for a moment think that all hope was lost. The chance of victory was gone. The Dark King descended from above, mocking and ridiculing their futile efforts. He believed that everything he had meticulously arranged could not be easily changed or broken. In Iris's moment of deepest despair, Shima spoke up once again, reminding her not to give up because all the citizens, everyone was placing their fate and faith, their hope in her, their queen, to regain her will. With unwavering determination, Iris made a bold and reckless decision. She flew straight to the ancient script, performing a ritual she had never had the courage to attempt before. Meanwhile, the protagonist had been taken by soldiers to the Dark King's castle, and there he unexpectedly encountered an old friend, Adele. Turns out, this young man was still alive. The protagonist also realized that the previous slash seemed too easy for a strong candidate like Adele. He pressed for the reason why Adele attacked Alice, and, with a cold expression, Adele declared that it was the king's will, and also the will of the entire Dark Kingdom. But the real question was, why did the protagonist try to stop him? Adele shrugged, ignoring him because that emotional shock would make Alice weaker, making it easier for the Dark King to strike and seize victory in the final battle. And Lutz seemed completely unaware of the dark conspiracy, so he was still just following orders from above. Now the protagonist finally understood the real reason he had been summoned here. Turns out, the cruel king wanted to eliminate him too, to claim the throne for himself and rule the Dark Kingdom forever, without having to pass it down to anyone else. Adele then transformed into his demonic form and revealed the reason the protagonist was targeted: because he was too difficult to control, to manipulate, and even intended to form an alliance with the Light faction. Without another word, the two rushed at each other in a fierce battle. After an intense fight, Adele realized that the protagonist was still holding back, not fighting seriously, so he decided to strike harder, forcing the protagonist to unleash the full power of his grace word. With overwhelming strength, he delivered a critical blow, crushing Adele under sharp stone spikes. But Adele, a seasoned warrior, did not fall yet. He suddenly reappeared, using darkness to bind the protagonist. With dark power, he shattered the protagonist's armor, knocking the greatsword far away, and finally launched a sinister strike, piercing straight through him. But in that life or death moment, the protagonist drew his mentor's sword, a blade carrying faith and hope, and stabbed Adele. A fatal stab ended the traitor, but Adele, before collapsing, had already completed his mission. It turned out he was here to buy time, to invade the entire City of Light. And once he absorbed the power of the ancient script, the whole world would be engulfed in eternal darkness. Everything would collapse, vanish into nothingness. At this moment, the protagonist finally realized the true purpose, the Dark King's ruthless ambition. He blamed Adele for blindly following him, despite knowing his cruel ambitions, mindlessly submitting to him. With a faint breath, Adele admitted that this was the price he had to pay for following such a dark ideal, and then Adele vanished, dissolving into the darkness, leaving the protagonist with a heavy heart. He did not hesitate, quickly grabbing his sword, rushing to find a way to soar back into the sky, desperate to turn the tide. But on the way, he was blocked by a horde of ferocious beasts. But then, like a savior, Yoga appeared, helping him hold them off, creating a chance for him to escape. He ran frantically toward the dock, but alas, there was no ship left for him to use. Suddenly, the protagonist's aura, like a miracle, granted him wings, allowing him to soar high into the sky toward the collapsing City of Light. At that moment, Shima was being manipulated by the evil Dark King. Corrupted, he wanted her to envy and resent Alice, the chosen one to become queen. But when Shima regained her senses, She scorned him, deeming him pathetic. Because she still retained her sanity, completely untainted by that dark power. With a kind heart, Shima wanted to join everyone in rescuing the people, protecting them from the enemy's claws. Meanwhile, Iris was pouring all her prayers into the ancient stone, hoping for a miracle, a ray of hope. Finally, the protagonist was close to reaching the floating city, but was met with countless monsters blocking his path. With unwavering determination, he swung his sword mercilessly, carving a bloody path in hopes of saving Alice in time to fulfill the promise he had sworn. But just as he set foot there, Alice, after all her efforts, had completed her prayer, and in a painful decision, destroyed the ancient rune with her own hands, the source of the city's power. The two knights were fiercely battling, when Valet, with his keen instincts, paused, sensing a foreboding omen, and quickly fled, while Fias mistakenly believed he had won. But then, seeing the strange light radiating from the ancient stone, he blamed Iris, saying she hadn't waited, that everyone had acted too rashly, selfishly. Shima, seemingly, also sensed the impending catastrophe, and helplessly accepted the tragic fate ahead. The entire island lost its source of power and began to tremble, collapsing into countless fragments. Alice, along with the entire island, plummeted straight into the abyss. The protagonist, in a moment of despair, rushed after Alice, trying to grasp her hand, to save the girl he loved. In her final moments, Alice was utterly shocked to see the protagonist again, but all she could utter was a sorrowful apology before falling straight down, disappearing along with the island, leaving the protagonist in utter agony. The Dark King couldn't believe it, unable to accept the truth that Iris had sacrificed everything, destroying the entire city just to defeat him. Suddenly, the protagonist, his heart ablaze with hatred, charged forward, plunging his great sword into him, swearing to drag him to the grave, to bury him in eternal darkness, fulfilling Alice's final wish. At the end, we see that the protagonist, fortunately, was still alive, drifting to an unknown deserted island, starting a new life. Thus, the movie ends with a rather abrupt and unfulfilling conclusion, leaving the audience with a sense of regret and longing